What is a subdivision? A subdivision is any division of land into 2 or more lots of less than 5 acres in size. Changes to existing subdivisions, such as re-subdivision or lot line shifts, are also subdivisions. Subdivisions are approved through a process known as platting. The subdivision regulations are what regulate the subdivision of land within Nashville and Davidson County. Tennessee Code Annotated charges the Planning Commission with the adoption of subdivision regulations to provide for the harmonious development of the community. The Adopted Community Character Manual, or CCM, determines the section of the subdivision regulations that are utilized in the review of subdivisions. There are different types of subdivisions identified in the subdivision regulations. These include rural subdivisions, conventional subdivisions, and walkable subdivisions. Walkable is an optional type of subdivision that can be used in our more urban areas. The Planning Commission makes the final decision on the review of subdivisions. There is no council review or approval. The subdivision process is a multi-step process. It depends on the size and complexity of a proposal. A concept plan is required if there are new streets or infrastructure. These must go to the Planning Commission for review, and a public hearing is held at the Commission. Final site plans are required for those subdivisions that have new streets and infrastructure. These must be consistent with the concept plan. These are the construction documents. If a final site plan is consistent with an approved concept plan, then it can be an administrative approval, depending on the number of lots. The final plat is the final step in the subdivision process, and this is what actually creates the lots and gets recorded with the Register of Deeds. This diagram is showing you the different types of final plats and whether or not they have to go to the Planning Commission for approval. If a concept plan was approved and a final plat is less than 25 lots, it can be administratively approved. If it's 26 or more, it has to go to the Planning Commission. If there was no concept plan and it complies with all subdivision regulations, no variances are needed, and there's no infrastructure required, and it's 5 lots or fewer, it can be a final plat that is administratively approved. If it's more than 6 lots, the Planning Commission must approve. If a subdivision requires variances or new infrastructure, then it does need Planning Commission approval. Chapter 3 of the subdivision regulations apply to conventional subdivisions. Chapter 3 indicates the types of improvements, reservation, and design that is required. These are general requirements and they apply to all of our transects except for T2. T2 is rural, and for those, the rural subdivision regulations apply. Chapter 3 determines the suitability of the land, and it indicates when critical lots might be required. It also provides guidance on critical lot standards as well as the hillside development standards, and it indicates regulations for grade changing devices. Chapter 3 continues by giving us guidance on lot requirements. These requirements refer to lot arrangement, which is how the lots are arranged on the land and how they incorporate public infrastructure. It also looks at lot dimensions and provides guidance for double frontage lot. A double frontage lot is a lot that has street frontage on both sides. These are generally not allowed. It also provides guidance for when lots front on or access arterial or collector streets. We typically want to limit the type of access that is provided to arterial or collector streets. An infill subdivision is a subdivision that is provided in an area that was previously subdivided and predominantly developed, and where the frontage of the new streets will be along existing streets. Infill standards apply to areas within neighborhood maintenance policy. It looks at the surrounding properties to determine the appropriateness of the subdivision. Any new lots on existing streets in neighborhood maintenance policy areas must be consistent with the existing lots in the area. The resulting lots must be equal to or greater than 70% of the average frontage, or equal to or larger than the smallest surrounding lot, whichever is greater. They must also be equal to or greater than 70% of the average lot size, or equal to or larger than the smallest surrounding lot, again, whichever is greater. The next few slides are going to walk through a compatibility analysis. This is an example of how we look at compatibility for a lot. The lot highlighted in blue is zoned R6. The existing lot is around 18,000 square feet in size and 100 feet wide. It is located in a neighborhood maintenance area. Because the resulting lots would be located on an existing street, it must be compatible with the existing lots in the area. Surrounding lots are defined by the subdivision regulations in section 352. The surrounding lots for this particular example are highlighted in blue. When we're looking at compatibility, we're looking at the frontage and the area of those surrounding lots. The surrounding lots are defined as the 5 residential lots on either side on the same block face. Based on the calculations, each new lot created from the subject property would need to be 47 feet wide and at least 8,400 square feet. So this lot would be able to be divided into 2 lots and meet the compatibility requirements. Chapter 4 of the subdivision regulations regulate the division of land in our T2 rural transects. These are the rural subdivision regulations. There are 3 types of rural subdivisions: the countryside character open alternative, the countryside character screened alternative, and the agricultural character option. The countryside character open alternative requires lots compatible in size, frontage, and setback to the existing lots along an existing public road. And it also prohibits development of sensitive environmental features such as floodplain and slopes over 15%. It does permit that conservation development can be used on the remaining areas if conservation development is applicable to that particular property. The countryside character screened alternative requires a buffer at a significant distance or a contextual distance along an existing public road, and then prohibits development of sensitive environmental features such as floodplain and slopes over 15%, but it does permit conservation development on the remaining areas if conservation development is applicable to that property. The agricultural character option allows residential and agricultural development where the primary function of the subdivision is agricultural uses. For the countryside character option, there are 2 different alternatives. If you have new streets or joint access easements that are needed for the subdivision, the first step is to identify the primary conservation areas. These are the areas that are to be set aside and not disturbed. You then identify the development footprint. This is the inverse of the primary conservation areas. So areas that are not identified as primary conservation areas are the development footprint. You then choose a development alternative for the development along the existing public street. The 2 options are the open alternative or the screened alternative. The open alternative allows for the creation of lots along the public street that are in character with the surrounding development pattern. Views into these development are considered open. The screened alternative, on the other hand, allows that areas along existing public streets are treated as a buffer. Those may include features such as landscaping, berms, and natural landforms. Views into the remainder of the development are considered screened. You then subdivide the remainder of the development footprint via either the zoning lot minimums or the conservation development provisions if applicable. This means that the area within the development footprint may need to be the minimum size that the zoning requires. For instance, if the zoning is RS20, a minimum of 20,000 square feet per lot is required. If the conservation development provisions are applied, lots may be allowed to be reduced in size from that 20,000 square foot zoning minimum. Continuing with the countryside character option, where new streets or joint access easements are required. For the open alternative, The first step is to identify the abutting and surrounding parcels. You then calculate the building setback along the existing public streets, and that is based on the 2 abutting parcels on either side of the development parcel. You then calculate the minimum lot size and frontage along the existing public streets. This is based on the 5 surrounding parcels on either side of the development parcel. You subdivide the existing public streets lots accordingly so that they are consistent with setbacks, lot size, and frontage. The remainder of the development footprint can be subdivided utilizing the zoning lot minimums or the conservation development provisions, which may allow for lot reductions if conservation development is applicable. For the screened alternative, you first start by identifying the surrounding parcels. You then calculate the depth of the screened area based on the farthest building setback on the surrounding parcels plus 300 feet. This is establishing the area that must be screened. You then subdivide the remainder of the development footprint via either the zoning lot minimum or the conservation development provisions. The conservation development provisions may allow for a reduction of the lot sizes. For countryside character option, where there are no new streets or joint access easements, you must utilize the open alternative. This is for development along existing public streets. For the open alternative, areas along the existing public streets can be developed into lots that are in character with the surrounding development pattern along the same public street. Views into the development are considered to be opened. The first step is to identify the abutting and surrounding parcels. You calculate the building setbacks along the existing public streets based on the 2 budding parcels on either side of the development parcel. You then calculate the minimum lot size and frontage width along the existing public streets based along the 5 surrounding parcels on either side of the development parcel. You then subdivide the existing public streets lots accordingly to allow for appropriate building setbacks, lot sizes, and frontage to be consistent with the existing lots along the public street. The agricultural character option, the primary function is for agricultural uses. This is only applicable to AR2A, AG, and SP zoning districts specific plan where the primary use is agricultural. Farming is the primary role of these developments. Subdivision of the land is most likely to utilize joint access easements as opposed to public streets. The steps for the agricultural character option begin with step 1, which is to identify the primary conservation areas. These are the areas that would not be appropriate for development. The next step is to identify the areas to be used for agricultural purposes, such as farming. You are then allowed to subdivide the land that is outside of the primary conservation area and outside of the agricultural use areas, using the zoning lot minimums. You apply the minimum building setbacks of 200 feet or 2 times the width of the lot along street frontages. SP developments may utilize the conservation zoning provisions if applicable. You have to demonstrate that the proposed subdivision supports the agricultural uses of the land. If you want more information on the subdivision regulations, you can find those regulations on the Metro Planning Department website at the following link. I hope that this information was helpful in understanding how subdivisions are created and the process that we use to review subdivisions.